Well, today, December the 5th, is actually the eve of St. Nicholas. And Nicholas was born to very rich Christian parents and became a bishop of Myra in Asia Minor, a province of the Roman Empire. Imprisoned when the Christians were persecuted, he was released by Constantine the Great and died on the 6th of December around 326 AD, and his relics are now in Italy. The legends surrounding him are that he was good, kind and gentle, that he loved children and was only happy when helping the poor. He was believed to ride storms at sea and save lives. Greek and Russian sailors are known to keep a small statue of St. Nicholas in the forecastle to pray to when storms come up. And there are nearly 400 churches dedicated to him around the English coast, and he is well known to the Lapps and other fishers of the Arctic Circle. But there is a shadow side to this, and Dutch children are taught that St. Nicholas comes with a black servant, and if they have been naughty, they will be put into the servant's sack and carried off to Spain. Spanish mercenaries were a dreadful scourge to the Flemish, and in those delightful winter and Christmas paintings by Bruegel, in the background are often troops of Spanish soldiers with pikes killing innocent people. This sack also, I suggest, represents the bad withholding parent, or with St. Nicholas's sack full of presents, the good containing one. So Father Christmas, alias St. Nicholas, actually came to this country from North America, and he was taken there by 17th century Dutch settlers who called him Santa Claus. There are also links with the Norse god Odin, and a knight called Ruprecht arrives with St. Nicholas in parts of Central and Northern Europe. He wears skins or straw and looks very fierce. If the children don't know their prayers well enough, he will punish them. People from these parts say that Odin can still be seen riding through the night sky on the eve of December the 6th. Here are the fearful and the good connected in these legends, and I hope this gives a flavour of what I'm going to talk about, the intertwining of pagan and Christian, darkness and light, with particular reference to the dying of the old light and the birth of the new. I want to explore with you themes and festivals around Christmas and the winter solstice that might remind us of our collective European past, and in the reminding allow us to reflect on some of the meanings behind them. I'll pace through that part of the seasons called autumn and lead down into the dark days of winter to try and understand the festivals of light and future renewal that are in the midst of dying vegetation and dying warmth from the sun. In reading around all of this, I was excited to find how much we are still linked into the past, but also saddened that so much of the meaning and understanding has gone, lost perhaps in the speed of technology, in poverty, in split families, and in communities. Is it an illusion that Christmases were better when we were children? I certainly retain a memory of sharp, cold and bright snow, people singing carols inside and out, the expectation of presents and something special at the foot of the bed. The context of the Christian nativity didn't begin to reach me until I was adolescent. The meaning of it developed very gradually, and I'm still exploring, and today is part of that exploration. Do we regard the phrase winter solstice as not belonging anymore, only of importance to Druids and others labelled New Age travellers? It actually has a date, the 21st of December. It is the day of shortest light, as the 21st of June is the day of longest light. Are we in danger of treating it as an illusion? If so, I think we delude ourselves, that mankind can overcome loss, despair and death with a frenzy of doing that is out of touch with meaning. I am, as a therapist and analyst, very aware of what a friend calls pre- and post-nativity depression. She is the wife of a clergyman and has no doubt seen a lot of it. In the USA, there has been a study of winter suicides related to the Christmas period, and it shows a sharp decline after January the 6th, or the 12th night of the festival, that heralds a return to work. I see people being rushed along the days and weeks of autumn and early winter into a frenzied spending. Even the Observer on the 4th of October this year had an article headed 82 shopping days to Christmas, and that of course now includes Sundays. The first sighting of a Christmas catalogue is now like hearing the first cuckoo in spring. Has anybody received one before July yet? Likewise, you are encouraged to plan your summer holidays well before the new year. Maybe the lighter side of this terrible recession is that our festivals could become simpler in terms of weight given to warmth rather than wealth. It is painful to face our own ageing and death, and our envy of youth and hopefulness. Maybe some of the illustrating of past festivals that I shall touch on can give us a reminder of where we are in the community of young and old. So, I'll now begin with autumn, as it's not so long past. Harvest days, if you live in the country, are more obvious. But even there the shops sell imported fruits and vegetables. I suppose to stay with potatoes, carrots, cabbage, sprouts, turnips, marrows, leeks, blackberries and homegrown apples might be thought dull, but I find I like my vegetables in season, and I don't want to eat strawberries in winter. This is a personal grouse, but again I think it does continually delude us of a life without death, a life that cannot be real, as it is always available, but at a cost. Thanksgivings for the harvest, now a somewhat genteel custom with all is safely gathered in even after bad harvests, give us an understanding of food gathered and stored as a means of life insured for another year. This was a time for drama, and Ceres, the Roman goddess of corn, played the leading role. In Britain she had other names, such as Corn Doll or Corn Baby, or the Neck, an Old Norse name possibly. She was represented by either the last of the corn to be cut, or the biggest and ripest ears in the field. The sheaf was often dressed in coloured clothes, lace and ribbons, and dominated the harvest supper. The belief was that the spirit herself lived in the corn, so cutting the final stalks wasn't popular. Sometimes from a distance sickles would be thrown, so no one could be said to have deliberately cut it. It was perhaps an awareness of the death and resurrection cycle needing to be propitiated by a human sacrifice to the gods of a much more remote past. The harvest supper was a way the farmer could thank his workers. There was much eating, drinking, singing, and games playing, and a sense of fellowship, I guess. The decorated sheaf would be kept in the farmhouse until the next harvest supper, when it would be ceremoniously burnt in the farmyard. In some cases, the last cartload of reapers would be doused with water by bystanders to ensure rain for next year's crops. Also, a seed cake was often given to the harvesters. Most counties had their own special way of celebrating the harvest, all springing from pre-Christian practices. The corn spirit had to be killed so she could rise again in the spring, and the cries were the wailing of death, and the dancing that followed was to symbolize the joy of resurrection. In parts of Devon, a labourer would gather the best from the sheaves and tie them together. The harvesters would form a circle round him, he would hold the sheaf close to the earth, and others would take off their hats in homage to the soil. Then, arms and hats above their heads, I presume in homage to the sun, they cry out, the neck, denoting the end of the harvest, and one of the men would seize the sheaf and dash to the farmhouse. If he could get indoors, other than by the front door, he could kiss the maid. Otherwise, he'd get a sousing from a bucket of water. In fact, this particular custom was lost in evidence in 1949, so not all that long ago. Some difference now with a lone figure on a huge combine in a field devoid of hedgerows, and he's probably wearing ear muffs and goggles. A very old dance, thought to be a relic of a hunting dance and a fertility rite, is still performed on the first Sunday after the 4th of September in Staffordshire. This is the Abbot's Bromley Horn Dance. A fool, a hobby horse, alias Robin Hood or the god Odin, Maid Marian, who carries implements symbolizing male and female, a bowman, 2 musicians carry carved wooden replicas of reindeer horns, an animal long extinct in Britain. They are very heavy, so the dance is slow and dignified. 3 sets of horns are black and 3 are white. The dancers advance and dip their horns to each other. Perhaps this stylized battle also represents the struggle between life and death. I now want to move to the time known as Halloween, or Samhain in the Celtic calendar. It's the end of October and beginning of November. By October it is obvious that the light is fading, the leaves turning and the cold increasing. Perhaps we feed ourselves with thoughts of warm firesides, togetherness and a certain relish of cold out there and warmth within as our way of honouring the dying sunlight. But it is a time of sadness at lost light, and there is some evidence that depression in some people increases with the loss of light. Can we bear to stay with this sadness, and perhaps unspeakable dread for some, without doing something? Can we afford to reflect on the dying light and own its inevitable diminishing? Can we afford not to? Actually, in the cities now, it would be difficult not to be aware of people sleeping in doorways, the young and middle-aged unemployed, the increase in the elderly, and the stress in the faces of GPs, health visitors, teachers, social workers, who have to bridge their own fears of job loss and the seemingly impossible task of looking after the desperate. The rituals surrounding Hallowmas and Samhain are where Christian and pagan festivals intertwine, where superstition struggles with religious belief. The 31st of October is Halloween itself, the eve of the Holy Ones, and from 6 o'clock that evening, Christians prepare to honour all the saints who have their day on November the 1st. 6 o'clock on that day is the evening of honouring of all souls, and the bells ring out to aid the souls of those in purgatory, some kind of acknowledging of the dead in the understanding of resurrection and forgiveness. The pagan feast of Samhain announces the ending of summer and the start of the Celtic New Year on November the 1st. This is a time of witches, ghosts, storytelling and ritual games. The spring fires of Beltane, which is a Celtic festival on the 1st of May, were lit again. A flame was got from flint and tinder to make what was called the need fire, and people lit their household fires from this flame. These Samhain fires were to give symbolic energy to the dying sun and to drive away evil influences. This was a time for looking into the unknown. Perhaps the hollowed-out pumpkins are a rather frightful image of a dying sun that is used to chase spirits away. It was also a time to honour the end of the apple harvest, and bobbing for apples, a favourite game for children, with hands behind your back, you bite into apples floating in a bowl of water. I don't know whether anybody's done that, but you get very wet. Is also a time for looking into the future to see your marriage partner or who your next lover will be. And you're told that from the different coloured flames from the nuts in the fire. Fires were well banked up in the evenings to keep the witches away, and ghost stories told with the family close together. All sounds a bit ideal, doesn't it? Linked into this is Mischief Night, when boys went out and about to play tricks. Gates taken off hinges, shop signs changed, and door latches tied, some other things. Does this now seem to us a way of projecting the bad into the boys to escape the fear of the unknown? The creaking door that no one has touched, or worse? Or was it a way of propitiating evil forces by helping them in their work? The Samhain fires were to honour the gods of earth and sky, and where Celtic influence was more pronounced in Scotland and Ireland, they lingered on. But in England, however, the fire day of November the 5th has taken over to commemorate the discovery of the gunpowder plot in 1605. But its proximity to Halloween is perhaps not a coincidence. We don't just have to think of the unknown with regard to fire and witches. The mass witch hunts of the 14th century were real enough. In Lewes, in East Sussex, on the 5th of November, they still have torchlight processions and burn an effigy of Pope Paul IV. I hope I've got that right, and you'll put me correct. And carry an 18th century no popery banner. It was thought that only by burning could you rid the earth of evil. The gas ovens of Auschwitz and other camps are a much closer reminder, as is the use of napalm in Vietnam. The commemoration of souls was linked with many special rituals. Soul cakes of gingerbread, called parkin or thar cake from Yorkshire and Derbyshire, were baked for relatives who had been bereaved in the past year. Thar or Har, another name for Odin, were Norse gods, and on All Souls' Day in Cheshire, a play called Soul Caking Day is still performed. A man dressed in a white sheet with a wooden horse's head with fiercely snapping jaws demands money from the crowd. The horse is called a hoddening horse, again linked to Odin or Robin Hood. And maybe if you pay the money into death's jaws, they won't snap on you in the coming year. Also in Cheshire is a mumming play called the Soul-Caking Play, where King George fights the Black Prince, the quack doctor heals the latter's wounds, the devil tells tall stories, and the horse is praised. Make of that what you will. Mumming plays were largely centred on small towns and villages, and seemed to be a way that ordinary people could get to the heart of the life cycle. The main season for the plays was in the new year from Boxing Day onwards, but there are plays for performance later in the year as well. Words were never written down, but passed from one generation to another. That good defeats evil seems central and also contains references to the Crusades, but to much older rites. A sword dance with a mock killing, then a resurrection dance where the swords were withdrawn, or a doctor brings the hero back to life with the claim that he can cure, and I quote, "Ipsy, pipsy, palsy and gout, pains within and pains without." After all the year's work of sowing, reaping and storing, and in the Thanksgiving, the remembering of the souls of saints and ordinary mortals, what next? An anticipation of the darkest day, or of the new birth, or both? Advent, which we are now in the middle of, in the Christian calendar, is a coming towards the birth of the baby born in a stable, as well as a coming towards the crucifixion and Easter day. It is a time of waiting, with hope, and all the vulnerability and uncertainty that goes with waiting. Candles are lit each week, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, to represent the coming closer to the great events. I now move on to the winter solstice itself, but first I want to read a poem by an 11th century unknown Welsh poet from the Penguin book of the Celtic Miscellany, and it's called Winter. Keen is the wind, bare the hill, it is difficult to find shelter. The ford is marred, the lake freezes, a man could stand on a single stalk. Wave after wave covers the shore. Very loud are the outcries before the heights of the hill. Scarcely can one stand up outside. Cold is the bed of the lake before the tumult of winter. The reeds are withered, the stalks are broken. The wind is fierce, the wood is bare. Cold is the bed of the fish in the shelter of the ice. The stag is thin, the reeds are bearded. Short is the evening, the trees are bowed. Snow falls, white is the surface. Warriors do not go on their foray. Cold are the lakes, their colour is without warmth. Snow falls, white is the hoarfrost. Idle is the shield on the old man's shoulder. Very great the wind, it freezes the grass. Snow falls on the top of the ice. The wind sweeps the crest of the close trees. Fine is the shield on the brave man's shoulder. Snow falls, it covers the valley. The warriors hasten to battle. I shall not go, a wound does not allow me. Snow falls on the hillside. The horse is a prisoner. The cattle are lean. It is not like a summer day today. I found difficulty in thinking and writing about the winter solstice as such, and about those much older civilizations of Celts and Druids, and my understanding of the Celts is not wide or clear. In his historical grammar of poetic myth, The White Goddess, Robert Graves suggests that, and I quote him, "The language of poetic myth, anciently current in the Mediterranean and northern Europe, was a magical language, bound up with popular religious ceremonies in honour of the Muse or moon goddess, some dating from the Old Stone Age, and that this remains the language of true poetry, true as the unimprovable original." And again Graves says, under the early Greek philosophers, a rational poetic language, now called classical, was elaborated in honour of their patron, Apollo the sun, and this was given to the world as the last word in spiritual inspiration. The Greeks were opposed to magical poetry as threatening to their new religion of logic. Graves quotes Socrates as investigating the reason of everything as it is, not as it appears, and to reject all opinions of which no account can be made. Socrates was a confirmed townsman who seldom visited the countryside. He said, "Fields and trees will not teach me anything, but men do." The early magical language of myth was remodelled to justify social changes, and matrilinear institutions and myths were superseded by patrilinear ones. Graves believes mythology is based on tree lore, the observation of the seasons and life in the fields, and he says nowadays is a civilization in which the prime emblems of poetry are dishonoured, in which serpent, lion and eagle belong to the circus tent, ox, salmon and boar to the cannery, racehorse and greyhound to the betting ring, and the sacred grove to the sawmill. But when we consider what were the customs of prehistory, or what might have been thought of them, in a book called Festivals and Ceremonies of the Roman Republic, Scullard says, "We are in a world of unlimited speculation. Evidence, mainly literary, survives to show what was done, and when explanations are offered as to why, they are often little more than uninformed guesses." So, we have the Celts with their mythology, their poetry, their religion, their vast creative and artistic skills, and we can begin to appreciate them, although even now only about a quarter of Celtic texts have been translated into English. With the Druids, it feels easier to relegate them to the barbarians that Caesar wrote of in his 6th book of the Gallic Wars in 52 BC. It seems he saw them as a tiresome lot. Druids were exempt from military service and war taxes, and some remained 20 years in training. Perhaps we should think about that a bit. More is actually known about Druidry than Druids, though a lot is still obscure. In a book called The Druid Tradition, Carl Gomm says, "Druidry is a living system that has constantly evolved and changed over times as it has integrated certain of the influences around it," which I don't think helps us very much. A translation of the term Druid is one with knowledge of the oak. It is thought that they evolved as a result of a merging of local Neolithic culture with the incoming Celts and their Indo-European ancestry. In legends, the magicians of Atlantis in the west had the secrets of nature, but some used these powers for their own ends to tyrannize others. Nature the divine mother and nature the dark temptress. Catastrophe struck Atlantis. The dark torrents were engulfed, floods presumably, leaving the white sages who travelled east to America and west to Ireland and the west coasts of Britain. A violating of nature results in the welling up of waters to flood the land. This myth comes also in some of the Grail legends as well as in the Old Testament. The masculine rape of the land results in the avenging anger of the feminine waters. It has a familiar ring. If we rape the earth and atmosphere, the ice caps will melt. Actually, there were druidesses as well as druids, and they had equal status. They were also judges, teachers, advisors to kings, scientists and inventors, philosophers, bards and prophets. Their concern was the meaning and purpose of life on earth. At court, no one had the right to speak before the druid, and the poets were seen to open doors with the power of the word, and the ovates, or prophets, had the powers of divination and prophecy. The role of the druid that interests us, however, in this talk is to do with the 8-fold cycle of the year, 4 of these being to do with the sun and 4 with the moon. The 2 solstices of winter and summer are the ones most people recognize as connected with druidry, and together with the spring and autumn equinoxes, these 4 festivals are astronomical observances. We can be certain that they were significant to our ancestors, as many of the stone circles can be seen to be orientated to the points of sunrise and sunset. Times of sowing and reaping were vital for a pastoral people. They needed to check up when to do this. The other 4 sacred times of the year are Samhain, as we've seen, the start of the Celtic New Year, and a time for the unknown, a contact with departed spirits, but also it was a time as with insufficient fodder, livestock was slaughtered and the meat salted and stored. Then on the 2nd of February, which is the Christian Candlemas, they have a feast called Imbolc, which was traditionally the lambing time feast. Then 1st of May they have Beltane, where you drive the livestock through fires to purify them. It was also a time for mating. The species must flourish and continue. And then 1st of August, the start of harvest, the festival of Lunasa. So each of these 8 festivals mark a conjunction of place and time, and when the forces of nature are said to be at their strongest in a particular direction. At Stonehenge, the midwinter sunset is the most dramatic. It's directly over the so-called altar stone, as seen from inside the circle. There's no evidence of human sacrifice at Stonehenge or any of the other circles, but there is of animal sacrifice. The compelling smallness of Stonehenge to me seems quite startling. Only about 20 people can stand at the centre. They must have been privileged insiders who could witness the rays of the dying sun through the gaps in the huge stones. 8 solar and 8 lunar settings are apparent over the year from 20 feet in front of the altar stone. Axe markings are to be seen on particular east-facing stones at the entrance, where the sun would rise at 2 equinoxes. These are likened to axe markings on tombs in Brittany and Ireland, and signify death. The axe carving was the guardian of the tomb, so maybe it was the guardian of the circle. Death is ever present in life, and we cannot have life without it. The people who built these circles and henges had an understanding of astronomy, engineering, a science of measurement, a sophisticated geometry, and perhaps an idea of energy fields to determine where the circle should be. It seems probable that the Celtic Druids received their knowledge from the earlier Druids, the builders of the megaliths, and the later Druids lived and talked in oval or circular groves made from a clearing in the oak forests. The grove became the centre of their whole religion, and at the winter solstice, Druids hold a light up to signify the spark of light necessary for life. White berries of mistletoe are distributed amongst them. This airborne seed, with juice the consistency of male sperm, symbolises seed in potential, a spark of individuality or God. It has no contact with earth and lives on the world tree or oak, the king of the forest, close to heaven. Cut with a golden sickle, the sun and moon and male and female are united. There's evidence of stone circles lying beneath Notre Dame in Paris and St. Paul's in London. Can we now take something back that belongs to us and allow ourselves to stay still enough to own the shivers down the spine at the wonder of the stone circles, henges and ancient barrows, the grove at Wayland Smithy on the Berkshire Downs, or emblems of man or horse cut into the chalk on hillsides? Perhaps these ancient people's understandings teach us something now. Together with the symbols and rituals of Christianity, which absorbed some of these customs, we can now look at the 12 days of Christmas. In Mesopotamia in 2000 BC, a god called Marduk had a yearly struggle with monsters and chaos from the underworld. In worshipping him, there were processions, plays, fires, and present-giving, and the new year was welcomed in with a 12-day festival. These customs and beliefs spread from the east to west and north, most festivals being connected with sun, earth, sky, crop sowing, and ripening and change of seasons. The sun has to be encouraged in the winter by bonfires, and the world not bereft of warmth and light. Hanging evergreens showed the seeds in the ground that there is life. As the days lengthened and plants grew, it was believed that the fires and evergreens had brought about a miracle. The process was repeated and spread. At the height of the Roman Empire, their winter solstice celebrations were replaced by the festival of Saturnalia. In the north, the festival of the Yule was kept and great log fires lit to honour Odin and Thor. Poetry was recited and songs sung by minstrels and mead drunk from horns. Mistletoe, again like the Druids, was cut ceremoniously and sacrifices made to mark the turn in the year. The Yule log was dressed with greenery and ribbons and burned in each home. Any part not burned at the end of 12 days had to be kept to kindle next year's fire. It was again thought to have a magical effect in helping the sun to shine more brightly. We keep seeing that as the different civilizations moved geographically, so did their customs and festivals go with them. And we get this intertwining again of pagan and Christian. The 12 days of the Christian Christmas draw from the Celtic and earlier festivals that recognize the dying sun and the birth of new light and growth. They also draw from the Saturnalia of the Roman Empire. This was the festival of Saturn, who was the god of agriculture. Originally a festival of 3 days, it extended to 7 and is connected with the winter solstice season. Is connected with the winter sowing season, which in Italy is from October to January. It was the jolliest festival of the year, and all business and work was suspended. Slaves were given temporary freedom to do and say what they liked, and a mock king was chosen. The greeting was Io Saturnalia, which I presume is hello farmer or something, hail farmer or something. I need that explained. Gifts were given, wax candles and fruit to friends, and clay dolls to children. Also cakes, gold and silver articles, and grains of frankincense. Paper hats were worn. The statue of Saturn in the temple, who always had his feet bound in woolen bonds, at this festival, these bonds were undone for the feast. The significance of this is hard to unravel, but it has been suggested that here the seed lying in the womb bursts into the light, and perhaps here is some crossover from the goddess Ceres, or indeed earlier, to the male god. But interestingly, the state treasury was also kept in the temple, another kind of god. After a great sacrifice, there were banquets for everyone. Seneca refers with disapproval to the city resounding with merrymaking, and Pliny retired into a soundproof room while the rest of his household was rejoicing. Shades of Scrooge from Dickens's Christmas Carol. Masters waited on their servants, and rations of wine were given to dependents. The feast of the Nativity of Jesus on the 25th of December was first adopted at Rome around 336 AD to replace the Natalis Solis Invicta, the birth of the unconquered Sun, S-U-N. Jesus was born at a time when the custom of reckoning dates had not begun, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke no mention is made of a month of year of the birth, and in the 3rd century various times from December to April were celebrated as Christmas. A favoured day was the 6th of January, supposedly the day on which Jesus was baptized, as people thought this would have taken place on the anniversary of his birth. December the 25th was adopted in Rome between 336 and 353 AD, and gradually almost the entire Christian church agreed to that date, which coincided with the celebrations of the winter solstice, Saturnalia, and the Yule. Also the Jewish Feast of Lights, held also in December, which had originally been connected with the winter solstice. And Norma's very kindly given me some information about the Jewish Festival of Lights. It would be interesting to hear something of that a bit later. What Christians could not abolish, they took and adapted for their own. So the Roman Empire was destroyed, but the Christian church grew and flourished. St. Augustine brought Christianity to England, St. Patrick to Ireland, St. Boniface to Germany, etc. And on Christmas Day in 598 AD, St. Augustine baptized more than 10,000 people. By 1100, all nations of Europe had accepted Christianity and Christmas celebrations, and for the next 500 years the Christmas season in Britain was the peak of the year in churches, monasteries and homes. I often wonder how he baptized 10,000 people. Now, what do we have now from those times? In no particular order: carols, holly, ivy, fir, mistletoe, gift-giving, eating, drinking, music, nativity plays, mumming plays, spices and fruit from the east, paper hats, crackers, Father Christmas, cards, lights, candles. In looking at a few of these, we might see where they've come from and their significance to us today. Singing being a component of most of the festivals I've talked about, I'll begin with carols, and that's how children dog us along to Christmas, by singing one verse, knocking on the door and asking for money well before Christmas Day. The Encyclopaedia Britannica says the carol is a kind of song affiliated with dancing and associated with the seasons of the year, especially Christmas. They came into English social life in the 14th century. A nativity carol of 1350 has the refrain, "Hand by hand we shall us take, and joy and bliss shall we make," suggested evidence of a dance song around the crib. However, the great age of the English carol is the 15th century, when they ranged greatly in subject, and in Richard Keel's Carols Newly Imprinted of 1550 there were crucifixion carols and others that were frivolous and even licentious. During the Commonwealth in the 17th century, carols were kept hidden until people were allowed to sing again. The first hymns to honour the birth of Jesus were in Latin and very solemn, but St. Francis introduced a joyful spirit in the 13th century, and his songs and those of other friars spread from Italy to France and Spain and then all over Europe. Also, it was St. Francis who invented the crib as a kind of visual aid. The early French carol was a ring dance with song and came to England around 1300. A leader sang the song and the dancer sang the refrain, and the rhythm was marked with claps and stamping. Elizabeth Poston, who is editor of the Penguin Book of Carols, suggests that it is the preoccupation with movement and rhythm that distinguishes early carols from most hymns, with their slower, more sedate metre, and that we ignore the dance to our own loss. However, dancing in church was denounced after the coming of Augustine, and it is not often accepted now. Though the carols were for winter and spring festivals and are now channeled through Christianity, largely, they remain expressions of human vitality and include lullabies, crib songs, wassail songs, chorales, hymns and Gregorian chants. We can sit and enjoy the service of 9 lessons and carols from King's College, Cambridge and other churches, but I think something is lost from the joyous ring dance or the home singing or street singing, if that is the only experience. And anyway, where does the rising of the sun and the running of the deer come from? Perhaps a much earlier hunting song that we need still to include. So, along with carol singing come thoughts of holly, ivy, fir and mistletoe, all retrieved with their important, significant aliveness in midwinter to become part of the festival of Christmas. Here I've got holly, mistletoe, and some French myrtle, which is what the French use instead of holly. And that the gold is to represent, well, what you will, but certainly the Druid sickles, and somewhere I think there's a star. They say the holly fights the oak at the summer solstice. He wins to become king of the forest until the winter solstice, when the title reverts to King Oak. Holly has special healing powers for fevers, asthma and rheumatism, and kept inside the house, the people and building are protected from fire and storm. When travelling, if you rest under a holly tree, the evil spirits will stay away. I don't know whether that's meant to be your evil spirits or other ones coming from outside. For Christians, the holly's prickles represent Christ's crown of thorns, and the red berries the drops of blood at the crucifixion. It is a very honoured tree at Christmas. Ivy had to be kept outside the house, banished by Christians as it was thought to be connected with Bacchus and licentious feasts. Mistletoe, that mysterious semi-parasite that grows on oak, apple and poplar, was not allowed inside the church, although, strangely, at York Minster a bunch is laid on the altar for the 12 days of Christmas. Again, an evergreen plant, it is a symbol of eternal life. It protects from witchcraft and brings good friendship to those who kiss under it. One other evergreen has a charming Christian legend attached to it. Jesus' mother Mary hung out his baby clothes on a rosemary bush to dry, whilst on their flight to Egypt. The bush gave the clothes such a sweet smell that it was honoured by God. In church primary schools today, nativity plays are very much part of children's experience. The ox, the ass, the manger, Joseph and Mary, the shepherds, King Herod, the wise men, angels, the star, and the newborn baby. An experience of good and bad, old and young, and much else besides. The children can help us re-feel a sense of beauty and simplicity in such a universal story. A more secular entertainment is the essentially English pantomime, with its links to Saturnalian drama. Essentially English in that we've made it something of ours. Drawing on the kinds of body language developed by the Commedia dell'arte of Italy that was universally understood, pantomime was robust, bawdy, and patriotic. It was entertainment for those who had moved to the cities for work in the Industrial Revolution. It's now much watered down to provide safe, conservative fun for the family. Perhaps something gets lost here. Keep the real nasties out of Sleeping Beauty and Cinderella and have Ian Botham as Buttons. Pantomime is traditionally for Boxing Day. But the 26th of December is also St. Stephen's Day, and the carol Good King Stephen, Wenceslas, reminds us of a saintly attitude and example to the poor and homeless, and incidentally about dependence. The message being, look outwards, not just inwards. The 12th day of Christmas brings us to the end of these festivities and marks the coming of the wise men. I hope I've marked some customs and meanings of interest within these festivals and promoted some questions. T.S. Eliot, in Journey of the Magi, leaves us with his question: were we led all that way for birth or death? The journey from previous millennia and the worship of the goddess, Mother Earth, Corn Spirit, etc., through to the Father Gods, Son and Christian God, shows how we have seen the old in the new, the feminine in the male, the masculine in the female, and the light in the darkness, and that we can reach into the collective unconscious by acknowledging our common beliefs, often grouped together under the name of myth.